We are joined by Charlie Goldsmith to talk about all things T and Jamar, as you can see behind us. This is a big deal, Charlie. Listen, I think a lot of people thought this was going to happen. It happened. What's your big takeaway, though, from this now being almost official that T. Higgins and Jamar Chase are going to stay in Cincinnati for a long time?
It's their biggest organizational win in 2 years. You know, we'd been talking to T about his contract since the Bengals lose in Kansas City in the AFC Championship game to end the 2022 season. The Bengals at that point were coming off a stretch where they had won all those 10 straight games beforehand. They could do nothing wrong. Their whole message was stop doubting us. And then everything they did for the next 2 years made you doubt the Bengals. it was the 2 years that you couldn't have even imagined in some ways, with the injuries, with how bad the defense was. But finally today they got an organizational victory. Today's about Jamar Chase being the highest paid non-quarterback in the league, but really today's about T. Higgins, who was gone and now is back and is here in the long term. What would have sounded impossible even 4 months ago has happened with T signing his deal.
So I think you're right there. I think we all assumed all along that Jamar was never going to leave Cincinnati. The Bengals would not let him go. It kind of felt a little bit like a last dance last year, right, with T. Higgins, that you're going to have the big three together one last time, one last ride to try to get to the Super Bowl. But then things changed. What change do you think with the Bengals, with the front office, with T. Higgins and this whole thing aligning?
So in October, before the Bengals played the Eagles, I had another conversation that reinforced to me T. Higgins is gone. They love T. No one loves T more than the Bengals, but it was a conversation that reinforced to me that T was gone. Actually, it was before the Raiders game specifically. And the reason I want to make that delineation is because that was then on Saturday. Jermaine Burton doesn't show up and Jermaine gets suspended. Jermaine was a part of the plan to replace T. Higgins. Cam Taylor-Britt and Dax Hill and DJ Turner, guys who play different positions, but they were saving money for their corners, who all had rocky seasons last year. So you saw a lot of the contingency plans that they had in place fall apart. You saw the Bengals, really the Eagles game and the Ravens game last year were the best examples you could possibly ask for about how much things can go awry when you don't have T. And I know the Bengals scored 34 against Baltimore, but if they have T that day, they score 50. The Bengals' plans fell apart during that stretch. The following month, T. Higgins has the agency change. Burrow gets more vocal talking about T. You have a team that's out of the race, so people are starting to look more towards 2025. And really coming off that Ravens loss into the Dallas game, that was the sweet spot. And then by February, I had conversations where they were talking about the Higgins deal as a done deal. You know, this wasn't done in February, but we knew this was happening in February. That's how quickly things changed.
You mentioned Joe. How much credit should Joe Burrow get for T. Higgins and Jamar Chase signing their contracts and staying long-term in Cincinnati?
And Joe Burrow, you can put him up as an executive in the Ring of Honor. No, I don't know that either of these deals get done if you don't have Joe Burrow, because Jamar Chase, a guy who doesn't even like considering losing seasons, and a guy who, with the bold goals that he sets, needs a franchise quarterback along with him. Then you look at T. Higgins taking less. I don't have a lot of confidence in either of these deals getting done at all without Joe. Definitely not this soon. If I'm Jamar, why do I have to sign the deal done now and get all these chess pieces aligned when I don't even have a quarterback I trust? No. Burrow and his ability to influence the front office, his ability to create a little bit of public pressure, which talking to some GMs around the league, like they respect that. They value the job Joe Burrow did around the league creating that pressure. There's a lot of admiration around the NFL for how Burrow did this. And he finished it. He aced the test.
Okay, so there are follow-ups I have to Joe Burrow about protecting him, about the other guy in the conversation here that Joe Burrow talked about at the Super Bowl. But I want to talk a little bit more about Jamar and T and the numbers here. So this is going to be around more than 40%, right, of the Bengals cap, taken up by 3 players with Joe, Jamar, and T. How do you build out the rest of the roster when 3 stars are making so much of the Duke Tobin pie?
Well, this isn't anything unique to the Bengals. Like, the Chiefs are paying a heck of a lot to Mahomes, Travis Kelce, and Chris Jones. It just happens that the Bengals' second and third best players play the same position. And yeah, I think Higgins is better than Hendrickson, and we can talk about that, if you want. But to keep going with this point, look at the models around the NFL, and sure, we can say the Eagles won the Super Bowl because they invested in the trenches. No. Teams pay their best players and then draft more good players. Teams have star-changing, inevitable talents that you can't stop. Derrick Henry running downhill, the tush push, Jamar, Joe, and T are not going to be able to stop it. The best team, Chris Jones is a pass rusher. The best teams have that, and then through the draft, they make up for the rest. And again, the Bengals' best players happen to play the same position, and there is nothing wrong with that. Just look again at the plays that they missed out on because Higgins was injured last year. The season would have been different if they had T. It was different when they had T, and that all again shows the value of a quote-unquote number 2 receiver.
But isn't this what makes the Bengals unique? This is their identity, right? Joe, Jamar, and T, that they're as unique as anybody in the NFL because of those 3 together.
Look at how they change matchups and coverages in the chess match. And I won't get into the X's and O's too much, but it's week 18 against the Steelers. And the Steelers have a really good, really tall cornerback named Joey Porter Jr. And because he's tall and Higgins is tall, they put him on the tall guy in Higgins. They have a guy guarding Jamar Chase named Corey Trice. And before that game, I did not know who Corey Trice was. And he's guarding Jamar Chase. That is the impact that having T also on the field does. It has guys like Corey Trice guarding Jamar. Sometimes it works the reverse. The team will put their number 2 on T. Sometimes they'll double team Jamar, and that leaves open space for T. Or, here's a stat for you. Andre Yoshivach averaged just 1.5 catches a game last year in games that Higgins missed. Yoshi was not a factor when T wasn't in the game last season. When T is, well, now you have Yoshi beating star corner Denzel Ward on deep balls down the sidelines. Having Higgins prevents you from running dumb play calls like the Bengals did in some games T missed. It changes the matchups. It adds so much added value.
One of the play calls, I think back to Jacksonville. Did T play in that game when they threw that wild throwback pass with Tyler Boyd?
He did, but I get your point. Yeah, that's the point.
That's the kind of play that sticks out in my head, to your point. Okay, let's talk about filling out the rest of this roster. And the guy that everybody's talking about now, when Joe went to the Super Bowl, was, he said Jamar Chase, he said T. Higgins, he said Mike Gesicki, he said one more player. Trey Hendrickson. He's the guy everybody's talking about now. What happens with Trey Hendrickson, in your opinion, going forward?
So what happened with Jamar and T wasn't the most important thing to happen to Trey Hendrickson this week. They say, follow the money, put your money where your mouth is. And what's so relevant to Hendrickson isn't what happened with the negotiations with the star receivers. It's that the Bengals had a chance to go out and get a quality starting defensive end to add to what they had, and they didn't. And these are names like Malcolm Kuntz, Dio Dangbo, Clavon Chason. There were 20 guys who the Bengals chose to not get. And now, a pass rush without Trey Hendrickson is maybe the worst pass rush I've ever seen. And I don't think the Bengals are planning to enter this year with that being the state of the pass rush. Now, I'm still concerned about the pass rush and the defensive line, but the unit they've built makes Hendrickson indispensable. That's why I expect more that he's going to be back, unless a team blows them away with an offer where the Bengals would be getting a pick and a young pass rusher to help make up for some of that loss of pressures. So if they can get both of those in a deal that blows them away, I could see them taking that. If they don't get both of those, they need Trey Hendrickson.
Would the most likely scenario be Trey coming back and finishing out his contract, or would a more likely scenario be the Bengals rework Trey's contract and reward him for outperforming his current deal?
I don't see the Bengals giving Trey Hendrickson a long-term contract.
Okay.
I think what makes too much sense and makes the most sense for everyone is if, yes, they quote-unquote rework his deal, they could frame it as an extension, but basically what it would be a slight raise for this year and basically a team option for 2026. With that team option being so high that it probably won't get picked up, but Trey Hendrickson gets to say that he's on a 2-year deal for $76 million or whatever, even though it's really more of a 1-year deal for 28. I think that kind of flexibility with the structure would make too much sense for both sides involved, which is why I expect the Bengals to end up going that way.
Is the microscope now on the Bengals front office to get it right and draft better to fill out the rest of the roster?
So in 2029, when I'm sitting here, on this panel, and we're talking about what the Bengals did, if the Bengals haven't won a Super Bowl, we're going to be talking about how they let Joe, Jamar, and T down.
Yeah.
They've nailed this part. And they're such transcendent talents that if they don't get it done, we're going to be talking about how they failed the rest. Or if they win it, it'll be because of the opposite. Now it's a Bengals team that is counting on young players at every level of the defense, counting on a new defensive coordinator to be a solve for all of the problems that they faced last year. To me, this just adds pressure on everyone in the building other than those 3 guys, because you have the championship caliber stars. It's now they've just got to get 100 other smaller decisions right to hold the Lombardi Trophy at the end.
Duke Tobin said at the NFL Combine, I don't want to pay more money for the same roster. Now, the Bengals have made some moves. TJ Slayton's coming in. They have a new linebacker coming in, and they're bringing back some of the guys that they valued to put back on the roster. But this is starting to feel like, to me, a lot like he's paying him more money for the same roster. Is Duke Tobin going to regret saying that, or do you think this roster will look different enough next year that he's justified?
I think he is going to regret saying that.
Yeah.
And while I'm as high on anyone on the planet on the Higgins extension, I would still grade this Bengals offseason a B-. You know, it's easy to go out and pay your superstar. It's harder to find value and find impact pieces in lesser spaces. And like a great example is the Bengals cut Alex Kappa. I didn't want to be paying him $9 million a year. I 100% get that. But now there's only one guard free agent left who's better than Alex Kappa, and that guy's a 33-year-old, even older, even more wear and tear, even more tread on the tires. The fact that the Bengals cut someone because they expected to be in a better position and now are in a worse position than they would have been had they kept Kappa, that's a sign of how probably this offseason didn't go the way they expected at guard. I don't think this offseason went in the ideal way at a position like defensive tackle where they didn't add enough pass rush juice. I don't think it's gone according to plan in any way whatsoever at linebacker. That to me has been the biggest concern, where all of the solid starting linebackers are now gone. And I think they wanted to upgrade at safety too, and then they didn't. That shows how many missing pieces there have been, which are the concerns that we'll be talking about for the rest of the season.
Did they miss out because they took too long to get this done?
This did open up cap space.
Yeah.
The answer is I don't know. But the Bengals had the flexibility to be more aggressive and more creative at guard, linebacker, and safety. It's probably a combination of overvaluing your own players, overvaluing your ability to develop players, and undervaluing the strength of the class for the reason they didn't go out and pay someone who maybe they would have been less thrilled about. But that made too much sense to have not entertained, and it's definitely something I'm questioning.
Okay, so I mentioned I wanted to do a follow-up here on Joe Burrow, and you've talked about it, the fact that this team at offensive line, they still have the holes at guard. How much of a concern is it that we're a week into free agency and the Bengals haven't upgraded at guard, and it feels more and more like they're going to try to play Cody Ford and maybe draft a guard at this point? What's your take on what the Bengals have done to protect Joe Burrow? Because they've got all the weapons they need for him, but the protection is still a question.
The guard position is the worst it's been since 2021. And, you know, look what they have now. They have a career backup in Cody Ford, and they have some projected theoretical rookie or a fourth-round pick who got benched last year. That's a lot like what they had in 2021 at guard, when they had a career backup in Xavier Su'a-Filo and a rookie in Jackson Carman as their guards. They believed in those guys entering the season at the time, and you don't need me to remind you how that went. There is not even security in here. We've seen the Bengals fail at this plan before, which is what has me concerned about the guard position and their lack of willingness to be aggressive to go out and spend $10 million to get old friend Kevin Zeitler. That's a great example. I know the Bengals would have been interested in Kevin Zeitler. How do I know that? Well, because Brian Callahan, their offensive coordinator, signed him, and the line coach on that team, his protege, is the Bengals' new offensive line coach. So if those guys saw something in Kevin Zeitler, I can guarantee you the Bengals would have felt similarly. But I guess whether it's financials, whether it's burnt bridges with Kevin Zeitler, based on how previous negotiations have gone, it didn't work out. And now the Titans are having some great guards. You've seen all the musical chairs fill up with the starters, and there's really only one old guy left who I even think would be a surefire day one starter for the Bengals at guard.
Okay, so to finish this conversation, though, even though we expected Jamar to stay a Bengal, and he is, even though a lot of us thought that T. Higgins would stay a Bengal, and he is, and even though there are still some holes on the roster they have to fill, this should be a day that is celebrated, correct, by Bengals fans to get these two locked up in Cincinnati for the foreseeable future.
Organizational victory in a massive way. And here's how I look at this. The Bengals basically just advanced to the divisional round. Congratulations, Bengals. You're one of the best 4 teams in the AFC. But the type of weaknesses that, you know, when you face the Bills, when you face the Chiefs, when you're facing a Super Bowl caliber opponent, it's stuff like this. It's stuff like in the Super Bowl 2 years ago, Oren Burks in San Francisco, who got picked on, Oren Burks, the Bengals' new linebacker, that kind of cost San Francisco that game. So it's these types of weaknesses that get magnified on the biggest stage. What a win. The Bengals did the hard part by getting these massive deals done. Now they're in the conversation, but it gets so harder to be the last standing at the end.
The great Charlie Goldsmith, we appreciate you coming in and talking about this. Charlie, thanks.
Thanks for having me.